Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. Just letting people into the room still and keep doing that over the next little bit. But wanted to thank everybody for joining today's session. Really excited to have Victoria Syme and Mark Stewart here to chat about hands-free engagement, different activations that you can do, especially looking at stuff that's happened over COVID for the last year. I have had the opportunity to see some of the stuff that both of them are working on, and should be pretty enlightening and a lot of excitement. I know I've always walked away from both their presentations with a lot of ideas. Before we get into it, just as always, we encourage people to ask questions in chat as you go, and we'll pick those up. So feel free to pop them into chat. And I'd like to promote our next session. We're doing a naming rights conversation with Judy Haber from Performance Sponsorship Group. That'll be on May 5th, and I'll send a link to that in the follow-up email from today. But let's get to it. I know there's a lot to cover and some great presentations that Mark and Victoria have put together. So I won't take too much of the wind. I'll let you guys do the description of who you are and where you come from. Victoria, do you want to jump in?
Sure. So hi, everyone. I'm Victoria Syme. I'm with Harmony Marketing. We're a boutique marketing agency in Toronto, and we manage and produce a number of festivals and events on the waterfront. So we do the Red Path Waterfront Festival, which brings the tall ships every 3 years, and Mama Duck behind me was kind of our claim to fame in 2017. We also do Sugar Shack TO, which is a March break kind of Cabana Sucre event that happens at Sugar Beach. And then we also have some other clients, Fleur de Ville, which I'll be showing you a bit later. We've also done Special Olympics Ontario Youth Games. But in the meantime, during COVID, we've actually been working on the Breast Cancer Society of Canada's virtual events for their Mother's Day walk and Dress for the Cause. And we're still trying to work on events happening in the future. But yeah, we do marketing, sponsorship, PR, communications, government relations. We're a small shop, so we kind of do it all.
And Mark, fill us in on Wondermaker.
Yeah, so I'm Mark Stewart, President Chief Innovation Officer at Wondermaker. We are a creative technology and innovation studio based in Toronto. We primarily work with agencies, brands, properties, events to create really unique consumer engagement experiences. The team that we have is kind of split between full stack developers, so digital platforms, but also a specialty within mechatronics and electronics engineering. So really that connection between digital and physical software development, but also custom fabrication. So think about anything that has a screen and an input and an experience, we've probably built it in some capacity. We do get inspired by the creative ideas from our clients, but we also do concept original things, and we do have some products as well. We are a little bit well known within the experiential vending space. Wondermaker started when Mattel called my bluff and said, yeah, we'd love a vending machine that spits out toy cars whenever you tweet at the vending machine. So we love a challenge. COVID has definitely been a challenge for sure. But we have seen some really interesting use of kind of emerging and traditional technologies. It doesn't always have to be the latest and greatest. Go back to what works at the end of the day. So really happy to have a conversation and kind of share my POV and also learn from Victoria and Brad and everybody else here.
I think that's a great starting point, because looking at some of the stuff that's gone on in the last year, those elements didn't start as of March last year. I think about some of the stuff that I've seen you do, Mark, and it really was, you've been doing it for 5-6 years at least, with those kinds of engaging activities where it is hands-on, using technology, and stuff that you've done, Victoria, where you've got these more art installation type pieces. How has pre-COVID and during COVID changed how you work in those spaces?
Mark, do you want to go first?
Uh, yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, one thing that I always go back to is we always believed that one of the best ways if you're looking for information or engagement is to use the device that is in people's pockets. Previously at events, there are a lot of kiosks, touch screens, enter the contest. Think about the auto show. I mean, days gone by, they'd have a lineup of 10 kiosks for contest entry. People are walking around with a device that can do that anyway. A lot of the things that we built, the interaction is through your mobile device, but then it gets displayed onto a screen or the reaction comes from something else, whether it's a lighting installation, but you're participating on your mobile device, which I mean, to you is sanitary because I don't have to touch a shared surface. With events going forward, we are definitely seeing contactless be really, really important. And because of the stuff that we've done previously, we use that mobile device as the gateway to engagement. The one thing I will say too is the resurgence of the QR code. Ask me 5 years ago if I thought they were great. I'd still say they had their place for sure, but a lot of people didn't know how to use them. But now with the camera support in iOS and Android, where you can essentially open up to take a picture and detect a QR code and get taken somewhere immediately. It all started with QR codes at restaurants or places that you would go to so you could do contact tracing. But the boom in the QR code allows for a really fast way to get people information that they need at whether it's a live activation or anywhere. Doesn't work when it's on the back of the bus traveling 60 kilometers an hour, but in the right setting, it's a great gateway to things like AR experiences, web AR. So yeah, those are the types of things that we're seeing.
On my end, from the kind of on-site events side of things, I mean, COVID, of course, has been catastrophic from, producing an event. I mean, for the Red Path Waterfront Festival and any event on the waterfront, the mandate for us is to bring people to the waterfront. So a virtual event wouldn't work. There are some virtual events which have been really great, really creative, really successful. But on the XM side of things, other than a few samplings that I've seen that I'll walk you through in a bit, it is really these kind of larger installations, things that you take a photo of, things floating in the water, things that will pop up to try to bring the PR and the social element into it versus physically handing a sample to someone or creating those large touch interactions, which we're used to. I'm used to having 14 different XM agencies at my event, handing out the bottles of Coke, handing out, RBC doing a money grab. I remember the days where we'd put people in a booth and they would grab as much, paper money as they can, or, wear the same goggles that the other person wore. Those to me are really, really, I really don't think that's going to happen right away. But I definitely think there's a lot of companies and agencies that have been really creative during COVID to try to get their product service out there without having to do the traditional sampling and physically getting the product to the person in that moment. So kind of that's the biggest I've seen. But it's definitely, yeah, for me, catastrophic on the event side, just because I was saying earlier, we're the first to close and we're going to be the last ones to open up, especially from the large crowd perspective. If we're used to getting 50 to 100,000 people, we're trying to be very conservative going forward in what our estimations are for audience and attendance.
And are you guys seeing a shift in some creativity coming from the brand side, or is there a hesitancy and kind of a wait and see approach coming from where they want to do? So they've still got to drive business, and XM's always been so successful. But have you had examples that have worked really well for you so far?
For me, for my discussions with the XM companies, a lot of them are thinking of and creating things like, what Mark's company does with contactless, being able to wave your hand in front of a vending machine, not even having a physical person there, having a screen pop up with a person that's remote in another place. A lot of having something shoot out with the product and not physically having the person there. Those are kind of the things we're hearing. But again, it's so hard because things will be put in motion and then either the brand or the company won't have the funds to do it, or budget will be pulled. And so they don't want to spend all the time and effort creating this when they don't even know if they'll have events to bring it to. That's kind of what I'm hearing from my XM discussions.
Yeah, on our side of things, we're really hearing we need to work even closer together. Um, the amount of ideation that's out there isn't lacking. People are really pushing the limits of what they previously did, but they want you to work alongside to guide and be that innovation side of things. I mean, innovation is all about bringing in people that are disconnected from what you do on a daily basis because they're going to see things that you might not. So there's a better level of collaboration that we're finding where people are more open to different approaches and thinking. But it is, at the end of the day, being empathetic. People are trying their best to react and adapt, and to kind of put your feet in the sand and just kind of hold strong and say, no, this is the only way to do it, is not the right way to approach it. So being open to new ideas, new thinking, and not doing what you've done before is hard for some clients, but at the end of the day, we're seeing some really creative ideas coming out. I mean, especially south of the border with some of the agencies we work with, some really creative thinking, but they can also be guided to, oh, I didn't know that I could just have a user interact through their device. They don't have to use a touch screen. It's just opening them up to the possibilities of doing things a little bit differently.
Yeah, and I think that's anybody who's held tight to being closed-minded and this is the only way to do things. I can't see them having been too successful over the last year. It requires too much flexibility. So jumping into that, I think you kind of laid the groundwork for the decks you guys put together. Victoria, why don't you go first? You've got a really great sampling of different ideas.
I'm just going to share my screen. All right, so full screen. All good, you can see Borat. Okay, so I'm just going to walk through some activations. Some of them happened during COVID, some didn't, but I think they're all COVID friendly. Also some marketing promos and collaborations that I think worked really well. So this is Borat, of course, and Borat floated through the Toronto waterfront in October to announce that that Borat was coming to Amazon Prime. They actually reached out to us because we did the duck. So they reached out to us 2 weeks before they wanted it to go live. And because we're a small shop and we have a lot of partners and stakeholders on the waterfront who can make things happen, it just wasn't feasible for us to make this happen, but they ended up doing it and it looked awesome. It was definitely a PR moment. They also did some out of home with this where they had Borat in the TTC stations and you could grab a mask from his area. So that was interesting. This is Fleur de Ville. This is Fleur de Ville. They're one of our clients and they do socially distant floral trails that happen worldwide. So they have mannequins, which are their signature installations, and they're all created out of fresh florals. So all of their dresses are all created with flowers, real flowers, nothing's fake. And every installation is sponsored. So we secured them Kim Crawford wines, which was great. This was one of the only sampling opportunities I actually saw during COVID, but they had brand ambassadors who were giving out complimentary cans of Kim Crawford Rosé. They were also situated in Yorkville Village Mall across from LCBO, so people could go and purchase. Everything was, fully PPE and everything like that. People showed their ID, and there was very little touch and interaction. National Bank was also a partner, and they had an enter to win contest where if you entered to win, you got a beautiful bouquet. They also had a media tour, so Aperol did kind of a cocktail mixing, and then Pusateri's was giving away floral infused water. But also too, I just wanted to kind of show, even if you don't have an activation, so this was Alfa Romeo, they came on board and we just flower bombed the hood of the car. And so this was great, a really awesome opportunity for social and things like that. And of course they had signage. But I think it was a good installation. And then this was the Breast Cancer Society of Canada's mannequin on the right side. Augmented reality, I know we've kind of chatted about it also with QR codes. We're actually exploring something like this for the waterfront in the fall, potentially. But again, augmented reality is interactive experience of a real world environment. So on the left, you can see if you hold up your phone, you'll see, you know, either going through an app or going through the QR code, you can see a mural or something come to life. IKEA did it with seeing different types of furniture in your you know, in your room or your house during lockdown. Virtual as well, of course, is something that was popular and a lot of use during lockdown. This was actually from Australia. An Audi A6 sedan was launching and they wanted to do a virtual test drive and a virtual road trip. So they actually came out with a 4-hour road trip that was on YouTube that you could experience, and it essentially showed you every aspect of the car, from the driver, from or the driver's seat, from the back seat. They had drone footage, they had the navigation and satellite. So it really just kind of showed you all aspects while you were in lockdown and not able to kind of go out for a test drive. Again, with installations, this is really going to pop up a lot. I just wanted to show some really unique ones. This wasn't during COVID, but I still think it can apply. This was for an activation to say see Antarctica before it's gone, and essentially very low, minimal waste. You know, you pop the ice activity or the ice activation in the morning, and by the end of the day, it's melted, and it really kind of shows you visually the change throughout the day. It's not something you have to see once. You can come back throughout your commute or before work and after work to really see how it's changed. This was cloudy with a chance of meatballs. This, again, this wasn't through COVID, but again, shows you the impact of kind of these stop in your tracks moments, very low touch and not a lot of interaction. But this was announcing the movie coming out, and they had these larger than life food items falling from the sky. So that was kind of a big social and PR moment. This, I just wanted to show a lot of opportunities with light and sound. So we've worked with a company called Krios, and they do these light and interactive installations. They're based in Montreal. The one on the left side is called Sonic Runway, and this was at the waterfront. This was a partnership between Harbourfront Center and the Waterfront BIA. And as you walk through this installation, the lights go at the speed of sound with the music, and there's different music and lights that show up throughout the day. They turned it off at 11 o'clock, but really it's, you know, on your own. You know, it's self you know, regulated. You can do it on your own. You don't have to have big crowds go through it. It was up for 2 weeks, so, you know, limited crowds. And then on the right, this is called the Island of Warmth. And we actually looked at this for one of our Sugar Shack events, because this could be sponsored, let's say, by Hershey's, or you do s'more sampling or things like that. But this is essentially a bonfire of lights. And as you jump and dance around the bonfire, it has the lights go up and down, and there's sound associated. So it is interactive, but you don't have to physically touch it. And it can be socially distant. I mean, the photo on the bottom is pre-COVID, of course, but I think it's a cool opportunity, and you could have a sponsor that come on board for this with a distant activation beside it. Direct to consumer was something that we also saw. So this is essentially boxes that were sent either in the mail or you could go pick them up. The one on the right is from the Rose All Day event in the Yards in Washington. And they had these boxes available at restaurants, so people could go in and support small businesses and local restaurants, but they had a lot of branded items. They had some sponsored items in here. So it could also be a good opportunity if you have XMs or clients that want to get their product in your hands or in their customers' hands, but they don't have the event. You could do direct to consumer, you could do a mailer. The one on the left was for Twilight Zone, and this was CBS did this for their VIP list. And there was some really cool things inside. Both of these boxes actually also coincided with Black Lives Matter protests. And so a portion of proceeds from the Rose All Day boxes went to Black Lives Matter. So just also showing some cause marketing. I know drive-throughs were also really big. I did the Crudes as an example because they included some not so much sampling, but they had a box of products that were given out to people after they drove through this experience, before they saw this movie. They had, you know, Fiji donated a bunch of water, gave out some water. So they had Fiji water, they had some chocolate, they had buttered popcorn. So that's also a way kind of for brands to get their products in people's hands without having to sample. My next one is collaborations. I know Mark touched on this, but I also saw some really unique collaborations between brands that you might not have seen previously, or, you know, triple the promotion because you have 3 brands involved. This was called Secret Cinema, and it was a partnership with Haagen-Dazs, Amazon, and then they had a few alcohol partners as well. But essentially every week for 8 weeks, they were releasing a new movie that you could see on Amazon, and it was kind of this secret club, and it was all about hashtag Haagen-Doors. So you had a coupon for different ice cream flavors. And then for certain movies, they partnered with alcohol brands. And so for Ghostbusters, they did a float buster with Jack Daniels. So now not only is Haagen-Dazs promoting it, but Amazon and their team, and then Jack Daniels and their team. So I think it's just a good example of a collaboration. And then this last one I thought was a really unique idea during lockdown. So this was Edinburgh Gin, and they had cocktails from the cupboard. This was kind of a PR and social play. And I kind of wanted to say that never underestimate PR, for sure. PR is my number one love. I started out at a PR agency. And so I really think that the stories, there's a lot of value in getting your stories out there. So this Edinburgh asked people to look in their cupboard during lockdown and give a list of all the random ingredients. And they had mixologists that put together cocktails that they released every week. And if you were included, the top 50 were chosen to receive dedicated recipes. So it was a really cool social play. But yeah, I know that was really quick. Apologies if that was very fast, but yeah, here's my info if you want to know more. But I think it just shows a mix of things that you could do during COVID and post-COVID, and activations that I kind of highlighted and thought did a really good job. So yeah. Oh, you're muted, Brad.
Took us all on mute. No, thanks, Victoria. I mean, there's some great ideas in there, and I guess, you know, one of the first questions that pops to mind is, you know, the things like the AR. I mean, do you have to have a proprietary app? You know, how much investment do you need to put into some of these ideas?
Yeah, so from our perspective, from what we're looking at for this waterfront activation with multiple AR stops, I mean, it's definitely, you know, budget. You have to put the budget in if you want to have these cool experiences. So, I mean, we are looking at, we're working with a company to kind of design these from scratch. So there's definitely a good amount of budget that goes into it. We're not going to use an app for ours because we just want to make sure that it doesn't limit people being able to use it. We're going to use the function where you take the QR code and your camera opens up and it takes you right away. But, you know, it's still a significant program. So instead of bringing the tall ships and spending the money on the tall ships, we're spending and reallocating our budget to this AR program because we really want it to have an impact. And depending, some of them have, you know, audio mixed in with it. So it all depends on kind of how detailed you want to get. But I'll leave any of the tech side to Mark because I have no idea how it actually works.
No, fair enough. And I was thinking about that, the Haagen-Dazs one's great. They won a bunch of awards for that. And thinking about, you know, some of the examples you shared, and some I know that Mark will get into right now. I mean, when it comes to data, it's completely different. That you start getting all this audience data for, you know, activations or events that you run, where you get so much pass-through traffic that you can't identify who the audience is. Has this changed how much information you can provide back to sponsors?
Yes, definitely. I mean, we're being very conservative because the number one thing my agencies or sponsors will ask is how many people do you expect to come? And I can't say 100,000 anymore. So we're being very conservative. We're also being conservative in the sense of how many people will use the QR codes. We are fortunate that the company doing the QR codes will be able to give us details on exactly how many people opened it per day. But really the analytics, other than an online survey that I always do post-event, will really majorly like come from our Google Analytics and any of our digital promotions that we're running. But I definitely think, I mean, we used to get 600 surveys completed in a weekend. We'd walk up to people, you know, give them the paper survey, have them fill it out. And I really think that's going to, we're not going to have that same set of data, but it's still as important. It's the number one question that my sponsors continue to ask. So we're using historic data and just being very conservative in what we think our numbers will be for 2021.
No, fair enough. I mean, the direct to home, the direct to consumer element. I mean, I think there's a big cost to it,
Yeah.
but then you get this very specific engagement. I
Mhm.
know we've done a bit of work with a wine company, and you know, the data we've been able to get back is actually, you know, here's the postal codes that relate to the liquor store
Right.
where you can drive them to, as opposed to not knowing exactly who you've given out samples to. So I know they've seen value in it.
Mhm.
Yeah, and have you done much of the direct to consumer, or is it more just from what you've seen in the market?
Yeah, it's more of what I've seen. I mean, the one with the rosé all day, you had to go pick it up, so they didn't have the cost of delivery. The CBS Twilight Zone, they had a VIP list, so I think it was a lot. It was a smaller pool of people. I have personally experienced during COVID, like a few. It wasn't Cliff Bar, but it was a few protein bars I got in the mail, and they just showed up. So I think instead of again doing the stand on the street corner and sample, I think brands, if they have the budget, are trying to do mailers. But yeah, no, we haven't. None of our clients have done them during COVID.
Because I know I've been to a couple virtual events where there's been a lot of thought into the direct to consumer box,
Mm-hmm.
that they've tied the sponsor inclusion to timing within the event. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so I think that creates that feeling of belonging, as opposed to just, you know, hear a bunch of samples, open it up, and enjoy when you want to do it.
Right.
So I guess it's all in presentation and how you think it through.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
And Mark, I know you've got a ton of information. I always love hearing all the cool stuff that you picked up and you're working on. I'll turn the floor over to you.
Okay, great. I will share, make sure we're good to go. Second. Make sure everybody can see. I always do my test of, did the slide move? Yes?
It did.
Wonderful. Okay. Victoria, awesome stuff. Inspiring things in there. And you know, I'm going to do similar and talk about some of the technologies that we have within our toolbox that are appropriate for whether it's virtual or whether it's in person. Hopefully it inspires. Just find that little nugget within. And what we've done really, really well in terms of Wondermaker is the combination of technologies. Like I said, emerging and traditional, there's really unique ways to combine things and think of it a little bit differently whenever you're thinking about going back and doing some COVID safe activations. It's really what we focus on is doing things that grab attention, and usually because of the combination of technologies, that's what it does. Here's the shopping list of things that we work on, primarily with agencies and other folks, but I do want to get into the fun things, projects that we've been a part of that have some elements of COVID safe technologies. This is an interesting one. This was back at the Rio Olympics. We also did it for Pyeongchang for Canadian Tire. This is the Canadian Tire Red Door. I would say well ahead of its time, bringing people to places that they can't get to safely or easily. Rio's far away, South Korea's far away. So how do you connect Canadian athletes to family, friends, fans? This was, as my son put it, Dad, you just built giant FaceTime. And I'm like, yes, if it's that easy to understand, for sure. But transporting people to be able to have real-time communications before the explosion of companies like Zoom and Teams, this is something that we built from scratch, even configuring servers around the world to be able to get the lowest latency rate so that communication doesn't have a delay. We got it down to the point where you can get real-time conversations. It was a fantastic content creator for Canadian Tire. They could get really emotional stories between athletes and family. We even brought Santa into retail, be able to talk to kids. Santa, of course, knows everything. It helped a little bit that the parents filled out a form for lead generation before. But that real-time communication is still relevant and possible at events. Think about what's being done in the NBA and using Teams to be able to bring fans in. It was really interesting to us to watch that evolution and see how people tried to bring people into events. Some things worked, some things didn't, but you just roll on and you try again. So the idea of live streaming, bringing people to places in a unique way, different form factor is always fun. When we talk about activations and experiential, we've been doing remote experiential for years. This is giving people a gateway through mobile or desktop to get to somewhere again that they can't be, but to be able to show their support and participate. This was done for Children's Miracle Network. It's going to sound weird when I say it, but it's an internet-connected helium balloon inflator. Children's Miracle Network, as you know, the logo is a hot air balloon. They have an event every year where they bring 10 awesome kids from 10 children's hospitals together. They call them champions. They got to meet the Prime Minister, but while they were going around for 2 days, we took over a ballroom in Ottawa and we set up this weird little thing that allowed people on mobile or desktop to go and remotely send a puff of helium into a balloon. We built a system that would allow for balloons to automatically inflate. You would see a live stream of what you're doing. Your name would float up with every puff of helium. And at the end of a couple of days, we inflated over 5,000 balloons. I think there were over 400,000 individual puffs of air, and the kids came into the ballroom and it was absolutely filled with balloons from everybody across Canada. If you think about remote experiential, it's a thing at a location that you can interact with remotely for maybe a smaller group or audience. So things like that are really fun for people to participate in as well. It's a little bit different and quirky. This extends the idea of remote experiential. I know it's weird to see photos of people without masks nice and close together. So again, the disclaimer, this is pre-COVID. But this is a track that we built for Mattel alongside T1, one of the agencies that we work with. A great group there. What we were tasked with was building a Hot Wheels track style art installation, which was kind of like the ultimate house if you could run track around. But what we identified is for folks that couldn't get to the Art Gallery of Ontario, how do you let them participate? So we built something that was within the Hot Wheels website that would allow kids to see the cars live streaming, going around the track, but also participate. They could launch the car using a standard Hot Wheels playset. It would turn the corkscrew elevator remotely. Your car would go onto the track. You could change lanes. We had a queuing system, so you kind of wait your turn. But you don't always have to, and going forward, don't always think about the people that are at the event. How can you extend that beyond using the owned platforms that you have? And not necessarily expensive technologies. I mean, use a Zoom, use something to be able to stream and allow for control and bring that to the platform that you already have. This is something that we did during COVID with PwC. This is a remote control BattleBot experience. We have a great relationship with a lot of interesting startups. This is a company based out of Finland that had this arena, but what we did is we customized the platform for PwC for a conference. It was all about competition. So this is real-time control of BattleBots. So you use your keyboard, you move the bots around, platforms raise and lower, and this was an absolute hit with their audience. One thing that I didn't show in here, I probably should have put the slide in, we also built another experience for them for the same event using Zoom and the API, where we built a Hollywood Squares experience, where it was the PwC executives. Unfortunately, we can't show that just because of proprietary nature of the platform. But using Zoom and traditional platforms, you can build games. So we had their executives, they were the Hollywood Squares. We had people come in via rooms, they would appear as contestants and a central host. And it worked really well, the game mechanics. So you don't always have to spend a lot of money in terms of development. Use platforms that are existing, but craft your own game and allow the people at the event to play a little bit differently. Good note about AR, and Victoria was absolutely right. This is a web AR experience, again, that we collaborated on with an agency and Heritage Canada. This was Canada Day last year. This is a virtual fireworks show. So the difference with web AR, like Victoria was saying, you don't have to download an app, and that was identified early on because they were looking at things that required an app download. We pushed hard on web AR, which is essentially just using your browser. You go to a site, it opens up your camera, and now suddenly there's a giant fireworks show in the sky with custom animations, sounds, and it looks like it's in your backyard. And the real victory there was, I believe it was over 750,000 people access this. And if you can imagine trying to do something where people have to download an app to do it, the numbers would have been far less. So easy to get to, frictionless, and a really fun experience. Talking about fun experiences and giving out sampling, this is something we did for Rock and Protein in the US. This is a jumping jack vending machine. So idea was walk up, it's a protein milk, and you get randomly assigned a number of jumping jacks to do in order to trigger the sample of the product. It could be 15 jumping jacks, it could be 70, but the build itself was fairly straight ahead. Pressure sensitive pad, a vending machine, and a controller system. So not that crazy in terms of the build itself, but a really fun experience. Also contactless. They didn't have to do anything and touch a shared surface. They were able to get the drink out of there without having to open any kind of door. It was all automatic. Another thing that we did during COVID was with Wendy's. This is the Grown with Love campaign. You send your tweet and it's read out via a speaker to lettuce to help it grow better. So you talk nice to the lettuce. There was a live stream component where you would hear these tweets being read out. They also complemented this with a live influencer that would actually be in the greenhouse reading out people's tweets. So think about all these different platforms and bringing it together in a really creative way. It's fun, it's quirky, and a little bit different, but live streaming, social content aggregation, and a live stream with audio to be able to make the lettuce grow better. Another thing that we work on quite a lot is brand invention. So these are the products that don't exist. So this was done for Ace Bakery. This is bread blocks. The idea was bringing together families over Thanksgiving, put all your phones in, it silences them, and you can have a nice family dinner in peace. What we did with this is we looked at not just the sound dampening, but for any science fans out there, we actually built a little Faraday cage within there that blocked all the incoming radio signals from the devices. So there was no way that they were going to go off, even if you couldn't hear them. They were essentially shut off from the world. And that was a really fun project. We produced 100 of these that went out to influencers. Another thing that we did for PwC, a match finder. So this was all done on a virtual platform. You take personality quizzes, all visual based, and it was a way to connect people at an event that might not necessarily connect in real life. So by doing the quizzes, you get scores. They were actual scientific personality quizzes. So you'd start to see people that matched within different industries, and you could start a conversation with them and have something shared to talk about, whether it's the personality or careers or social style quiz. You had an opener, you had a way to connect. And every time you did a new quiz, your list of contacts would change. So you'd be like, oh, I don't know this person, I'll reach out to them. I have something to start a conversation with. Thinking about contactless in retail, this is Nike at the Chicago store. This was more of an art installation, light and sound, jump up and down on the pads, put a pair of Nike shoes on. For anybody that's old like me, you might remember the water games where you press the buttons and the rings move around. This was done with air. So giant fans moving the balls around, and then depending on the ball, it came out automatically, almost like OLG, and the ball coming out in the draw. Depending on the logo color, you would get a different prize. So no contact. Once you took that ball, it was yours to keep. Just fun installation for people to play with. To Victoria's point about these large outdoor installations, this is something we built for TELUS. This is an LED balloon forest, so giant light up balloons. We had programmed animation. It was a map of Canada that you could visualize the TELUS network on. It doesn't have to be this scale. I think this was 300 or so of these balloons. But even just thinking about the advancement in some lighting technology, these didn't exist. We had to build custom boards and LEDs and light up these balloons that are usually used at car dealerships. They don't have the light, and then we had individual controllers within them. So lots of things you can do with these outdoor spectacles. Keep them safe, keep people distant. Another thing that we did for dairy farmers during COVID, this was a milk glass that was powered by social. So as you tweet your support with Fill Up the Love, the milk level in the glass would rise. This was at the distillery district. It was there for 2 weeks or so. It was featured on BT, so they had a nice media buy behind it, but a single standalone installation that's safe, that people can participate with not only at the location, but remotely as well. And this is also another thing that we started working on at the start of COVID. This is a live crowd. So you can imagine with everything that we've done in terms of remote control for experiences, we really feel like for events and whenever people want to get back into places, you're going to have the group of people that wants to go back and you're going to have the folks that don't. So how do you have that participation? So we've put together a platform that's white labeled that anybody can use to plug into an existing app, an existing site, and do things. So think about t-shirt cannons that you can fire remotely, an entire stand full of flags that wave, but all powered by people cheering. I do encourage you to check out what MLSE is doing with their digital arena. The really interesting thing about what MLSE is doing is they're constantly seeking feedback because they know this is new, it's different, people have to get used to interacting remotely in a new way. So it is a bit of trial and error. What works, what doesn't, and then pivot and change and do something that your audience is actually looking for. So that's my quick show.
Fabulous. Thanks, Mark. I mean, and you kept it in time. Usually I'm used to you having so much material.
Yeah, just try to shut up sometime.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I guess, one of the questions for all of this, and I know some of the advanced questions we got, is just, I can see how MLSE invests in this, or OLG or PwC as large organizations. What are the entry points for a smaller brand or for a municipality that just doesn't have large budgets? Or is there an opportunity for them to get engaged in this?
I think there is. I mean, the PwC example is a really good one. Unfortunately, like I said, I can't show, but using existing platforms and making them do something that they're not necessarily meant to do that everybody is used to. The Zoom API for most developers is easy to use. You can place boxes where you want. And all we did is reconfigure this grid that we had 9 people, but we also added our contestants and our host to it. So the development effort in it isn't significant. There's definitely time you need to put into coordinating, having the hosts there and streaming them. There's a little bit of expertise that comes into that. But if you're looking for things kind of in the keep it under 10K or keep it under 5K, these platforms have really robust APIs that if you work with your development team or an agency, you can bring things together without having to always build something custom. It's just the creativity of looking at something a little bit different. Because, I mean, if you look at your Zoom screen right now, you've got limited interaction in terms of you can do reactions, you can do chat, but there's other things that might be able to be happening in the background that people can control. They can send a message. They could have some sort of snow start to fall. So doing things that appear on camera that people can control remotely, they don't always have to be expensive and they can have some high impact.
Well, and one of the things I was thinking about as you're talking about some of the activations you've put together, there's a huge social component for it. So if you're looking at trying to build your social engagement or get your audience engaged in that, those iconic pieces, and even the ones you were showing, Victoria, that's the sort of the Instagram shot. I think that you would get a lot of that engagement from. And if you had much feedback on how that's impacted social following.
Yeah, and I mean, for our side of things, I mean, whenever you're working, especially with somebody like a Wendy's, there is a media buy behind these to drive that awareness. You can't always expect if you build something, if you do have a smaller following, that you're going to get this. I give the analogy: if you build the world's best roller coaster and stick it in the middle of nowhere and nobody's going to know about it, you have to promote it. So use those channels that you have to be able to promote it, but also look for those partnerships and amplification through media. I mean, you got to drive those eyeballs to it. The failures come whenever you don't support what you're doing. I mean, much like sponsorship. I mean, if you don't activate, what's the point of having that? You need an engagement methodology. But for sure, using those platforms that brands have to drive that engagement is key, and social is the biggest one of them all.
And then I guess, Victoria, you might have some opinion on this too, is what are you finding brands are doing in terms of that engagement piece? So, there's always been a challenge about Canadian brands don't put enough into activation. And, is that model still the same now that we're into COVID, or is there a requirement that, yes, we're expecting sponsorship, but we need you to invest this much in activation?
Yeah, I mean, so you'd love the 1-to-1 ratio, right? Where every dollar the sponsor spends, they're going to spend $1 on activation. It was that way, maybe 5 years ago. I think the most recent landscape study shows 58 cents or 68 cents on the dollar, but this was all pre-COVID. For our experience at the event, I 1000% agree with what Mark's saying. You have to be able to put money into your activation if you're going to sponsor an event, and you have to put some PR around it. So even we had Nintendo Switch come to one of our events to launch Nintendo Switch, and they set up the booth. They had a massive, 20 by 40 or 30 by 40, space on site, but they also did a whole PR play where they did a whole summer tour. They included our festival in the news release announcing where they were going. So not only are they're not even a sponsor of the event, they're just an XM, yet they're including us in their PR. They're getting social on site. You really, really have to spend the budget to activate, because that's where you're going to see your engagement and your return. I mean, we'll have, again, pre-COVID, we'll have booths come and they want to sell windows and doors. Okay, that's fine, but you can't just sit there with a 10 by 10 table and expect people to come up to you. We try to work with our brands and say, do a window washing game and give a discount to the person who washes the window in the quickest time. But we really see the partners that want to spend the money and activate are the ones that are going to get the engagement. But I 100% agree that there has to be a PR or social play. And again, you don't need a massive budget. I think there's a lot of value in micro influencers right now. So I'm talking, the 30 or 20,000 and less. We don't have massive budgets for some of our charitable clients, and we're getting a lot of interest and return from these micro influencers who have super engaged audiences, but they might only have 13,000 followers, but their followers are very, very, very engaged. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but I feel like, yes, you have to, if your budgets are less post-COVID, you still need to account for the money that's going to go into activation. Because again, nobody's going to interact with your booth if you don't have something fun to do.
Yeah, and I guess from a brand side, I've heard from a number of brands that, oh, well, we can't do activation, so we've cut our budget for the team. And it's like, okay, well, no, you've actually got to do the equal amount or more to make success in the virtual world. So it's a bit of a challenge when it comes to the finance office, I guess. But you did bring up sort of an interesting point there about, what's the planning cycle for something like this? Because you've got to have all that forethought for bringing in influencers or other engagement. Do you have a set time that you've kind of set aside for each activation or each implementation?
For us, because we're on the opposite side. I mean, people pitch us to come, so we're still pitching, 3 months out, but also we're not having a lot of on-site activation. So I don't know, Mark, in terms of, how long it takes to create these things, or working backwards. I don't know if you.
Yeah, I had one of those moments of joy last week where we're actually collaborating with one of our clients on something for the holidays already. I mean, that's amazing, and I think we're starting to see slightly longer time frames for some things, but it's still very rapid. I would say maybe 25% of the time, there's no worry with timeline, where it's like, okay, we have time to really think this through, to get alignment across all of the partners. There is a lot of things happening really fast. And what it does is it risks the quality of what goes out. And we do push back as much as we can, but we also, to my earlier point of collaborating and understanding, There are a lot of things at play that you have to move quickly on, especially with the changing landscape of you can open, now you're closed. You can go, now you can't. So it's kind of like a come here, go away, where you never know when things are going to change. So you have to move quick. But we're seeing a slight uptick in advanced planning, which is great, because I think it's the optimism of what the fall might mean, that we're starting to have those conversations.
And I guess for all these engagements, I mean, where are you plugging in? Are you having to work with public health units to get some of these elements approved, or you're just kind of trying to decipher what the government's put out? How integrated are you?
On our side of things, and I think it might be a little bit different for Victoria, because I mean, you're actually running an event, so we're a little bit removed from that. But what we can do is part of the planning and ideation is go, here's ways to create low touch environments, right? So don't get people to touch a shared screen. Don't have anything that they need to make contact with, because you can use gesture technology, pressure pads, proximity. There's all kinds of computer vision as well to be able to detect people and numbers. We actually have a piece of software that I'll kind of tease now, for really customized people counting within spaces, both indoor and outdoor, that can send alerts and be able to notify, are there more than X number of people in the space? If I think about that 5 years ago and saying, yep, we're going to have a robust system that we can get up and going in a couple of weeks for your event, it would have been improbable. But thankfully, there are a lot of platforms and hardware and software that you can readily use at fairly low cost to be able to keep people safe. But generally, we're removed. But I think it might be different for Victoria in that planning.
Yeah, I mean, normally we're on public parks, so we get City of Toronto park permits for our big events. We're trying our best to plan around that and actually not have any of our activities or stops in a public park, because they've actually canceled permits until July and they're working 3 months ahead. So we anticipate they're going to continue to be canceled. So we're actually trying to work with our stakeholders on the waterfront to find private property, which is a lot easier to, install something than have to go through the parks permits. And then our production team, we work very close with KSA Toronto, who manage all the production, programming, infrastructure, all that kind of stuff. They're on constant conversations with the city, just to see what their rules and regs are. Again, it continues to change, right? So we're always asking for blueprints of what's going to happen when we open, but there's so many different variables and so many different unique circumstances that, we're really at the mercy of what the city says. We have to abide by all their rules. So yeah, it's just stay in conversations. I mean, I'm on all of the government webinars and calls, TIO, FEO, all the festivals and events networks, all the tourism networks, just to see what's going on at all levels of government, and just trying to stay as informed as possible so that, once we're out of this, we can kind of move quickly, or try to move quickly.
But I also think there's an element of, once we're out of this, these types of activations, I don't know, I don't think it should go away. I think there's great opportunity for it. And as some of the stuff that you highlighted, Mark, and I've heard from a number of people, especially like large teams, like FC Barcelona or Madrid, who've got these incredible followings all around the world, and they know that 95% of their fan base will never go into their stadium, but all of their activation is pretty much delivered on premise at the stadium. So this gives great opportunity to extend that and to get people engaged wherever else, so they could do something online, and all of a sudden they're putting balloons into the stadium or something like that. I think there's some fantastic opportunities.
Yeah, for sure, and especially with the change in sports wagering, and I mean the ability to people to participate that way. I mean, it's always done remotely, and those platforms are going to be huge in terms of that type of engagement. I'd love to see more charitable component to it, but we'll see what shakes out with that.
For sure. And I think it's been great. It's been fantastic to have you guys here. I don't know if we've got any other questions that people are looking to ask in. I've got a couple questions from the advanced questions. Just do you have tips for how to get engaged in these types of virtual events?
Tips. It's hard because virtual, I mean, yeah, it's hard with virtual events. I feel like there's so much screen fatigue right now. I love that fireworks idea. I think being super creative and having it virtual, but being able to go outside, look up, and even if it's through your phone, being able to experience something outside, which is I think what everyone's missing, especially us. I know I said it earlier, but we can't really just do a live stream of the waterfront. That's not the case for our event. So I think, be strategic when you're doing virtual. Don't just say, oh, well, I guess we have to move virtual. Make sure that it fits with the mandate of your event. So yeah, it's hard. I don't know. I don't have any tips or tricks because we weren't able to do any virtual events, but I don't know if Mark has any.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, think about why people go to conferences to interact, because they have the ability to randomly meet people. So I think one thing that is really important for any virtual event is the way that people can connect. I've been to some virtual events where you kind of get placed at a table and you can start conversations, nice breakouts. I think at least having something to start talking about is also key, because it's hard to network whenever you don't have something. Like if you're in a physical space, you can talk about that booth you're at, or that learning module that you were just a part of. You kind of step out of the room. Give those prompts, those ways for people to engage. And the other thing that I would say is don't be afraid to look at platforms a little bit differently and break outside of what that particular platform can offer, because of the ability to bring in feeds. There's a lot of existing game platforms that people can participate, again, through their mobile device. And I can't count the number of times that we've used Jackbox, which is a fantastic game platform. You stream it and you participate on your device. Think of different combinations, and don't just limit yourself to what one particular platform offers. Think about what you can bring in that's true to your event.
Yeah, and it's I think even on a small scale, there's so many different things you can do. I've got a group of guys I play poker with, and we do it. One screen is poker and one screen is Zoom, and you're able to engage with one another. Jackbox does the same thing. So yeah, I think there's thinking differently about how to bring those pieces together, and it may take a little bit of time to figure out how that works. But there's I'm finding there's a never-ending number of engagement pieces that are developing, and technology that's being developed by companies like yourself. And even last year with Vancouver Mural Festival, they couldn't do the mural festival they wanted to in the past, and they just ended up treating it like a treasure hunt and created bike maps for everyone to bike around the city and see all the murals. So I think there's some ways to tie things in a safe way. But it's been fantastic to have you guys both here. Always enjoy talking to you both. Always some fantastic input and some stimulus for new ideas and tech. And I highly recommend anybody look up some of the stuff that Mark's got on Wondermaker. There's some great videos on YouTube you've posted there, Mark. And it's a good rabbit hole to get yourself into for a few hours watching some of the tech that you've built. And I'm going to put, assuming that you guys are okay, I'm going to put your contact information in the follow-up email for tomorrow. This session has been recorded, so you can follow it up or on our website to catch up on elements you missed. And if you want to connect with Mark or with Victoria to ask future questions, we'll have your contact information there. And then on May 5th is our next session with Judy Haber talking about naming rights. Happy to have you come join us, and we'll send you a link for that. And again, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Victoria. It's been fantastic having you. And thank everybody for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Victoria. Thanks, Brad. Thank you all.
Bye guys.
Yes.